All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Hey, if you're one of them guys that you sneak into your wife's room and she's gone and into her drawers and puts on her lingerie and some makeup and runs around the house feeling pretty, don't worry. A lot of what we're going to talk about today applies to your John Deere combine as well. And so first thing on a combine inspection, I would say work with your local dealer. Absolutely work with your local dealer. A lot of times the discounts that you get on parts and service is going to pay for the inspection. So you're almost out nothing, but your factory techs are going to have some tools and just more knowledge of them little things to look for to hopefully keep you from having some downtime in season. That's what it's all about. And so I want to get going on beans. They were ready the other day, and so I thought today would be a good time to get the combine out and start some maintenance and inspection on it and get ready to do beans in a couple days. It's just how I roll. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump up in the cab. We're going to fire it up. We're going to try our lights, our air conditioning, our wipers, our blinkers, all that kind of accessory stuff, and then we're going to do all the functions of the combine, as our chaffer and sieve open and closing, the thrashing, the separating, the fan, the feeder house. Do they all speed up and slow down like they're supposed to? Does the reel we hook up to our head? Does the sickle work? Can you bring your pans up or down hydraulically like you're supposed to? Can you bring your reel in and out, up, down? Does the reel turn? Everything move good on the header drive? The feeder house drive, it operates. You know, the feeder house clutch works, the separator clutch works, the unloading auger swings, all that stuff. You're going to just check out every button in the cab. You're going to push it several different ways to just make sure it works. Make note of what doesn't work, and then you're going to jump down while everything's still running. You're going to jump down with a temp gun, and you're going to point at gearboxes and bearings and shafts. And on all your idler bearings, they should run a fairly similar temperature. They'll be a little bit different because some spin faster than others, some have a higher load than others, but there shouldn't be a crazy one. If there's a crazy one, pull it off now and change the bearings before you get into the field in season, and you're going to save that time later. That's the whole point of these combine inspections, and I'm a big believer in them. I can say that I've been doing them for myself and at the dealers for a lot of years, and it really does help us. I mean, it's a legitimate thing. The one thing, if you're not working with your dealer, for sure, get an oil scan from every gearbox, take it into your dealer, and start a record of them oils, because the oil scan is a fantastic tool to help find a failing gearbox long before that sow eats its piglets. You know, when you can start seeing that some of the materials in the oil are getting high, you rinse it, refill it, 20 hours, pull another sample if they're high again. At that point, on your nearest day that you can, pull that gearbox down, pop in some bearings, maybe a tooth or two, and some seals, and you should be good to go, instead of cruising along and all of a sudden clunk, bang, pop, you know. Now you're out thousands of dollars plus downtime and all that stuff. And then we'll go to the Lexion. We're just going to hit a few common points of the Lexion. Again, there's a lot of similarities from these combines brand to brand. The maintenance points are very similar. And so let's move on over to the combine and see what we got. So we're just going to start right here because it was the closest to the camera. I didn't want to walk too far. Got to conserve calories, you know. So on the Lexion, there's one idler, this idler right here. He is spring loaded. That guy there. Doop. He is spring loaded on the back, but he is tight. It is not a floating idler. So you want to loosen that nut, let it pull back for tension, maybe smack it with your hand, and then tighten it back down. That's your first stage for a shoe. For your not your shoe, your cross augers, your clean grain and tailings and stuff elevators. And so what will happen is your symptom would be that if you're in high moisture corn, you know, you're running 4, 5, 6,000 bushel an hour, and you're pushing a lot of corn up in the grain tank, he can start to slip, and you'll get your belt slippage alarm going off. And why they did that one without being a floating idler, I don't know, but it's true. I'm not lying. The next thing is variator maintenance. So all the variators are the same. Whether it's feeder house, cylinder, or rotor. So on the Lexion, you've got a pre-thrash where any loose, easy to thrash stuff gets thrashed. It drops onto the prep pans, and we'll see that in a minute. And then it goes right into clean grain system. It does not go through thrashing. Then you have your thrashing drum, and then you have your impeller, and then you have your rotors. And so your thrashing runs on its own drive system, and your separating runs on its own drive system. A couple extra belts, but it's a very nice system that you can fine tune and run things separately. But both rotor, separating drive, and cylinder drive all have variators that have the same maintenance. And so you got your Zerk, and you got 3 pins up here, and all you need to do is take a quick look. Is the pin centered in the guide? If it's centered in the guide, the little bushing's good. If it's running to one side, or you see this grease Zerk is starting to push against one side, then put them bushings in. It's a very quick and easy thing to do. 3 bolts here, this pops off, 3 bolts there, that gold plate pops off, and then it's a couple minutes with some little tiny sharp screwdrivers to wiggle them stupid plastic bushings out, pop the new ones in, you're good to go. These variators down here, you got 6 Zerks. I removed that. There's a safety can there. I got that thing in the storage bin at home, so I can easily see all 6 Zerks. You grease all 6 Zerks, and then on all 3 of them, feeder house, cylinder, and rotor. And then each morning while the engine's warming up, cycle them fast, slow a couple times, and then bring it back to your speed. And what that does, that's the same for a lot. Your old John Deere's, we always did that too. And that moves that grease throughout the system and helps get lubrication everywhere that's needed. If you don't do that, usually that bushing on the back side gets wore, and you get a little vibration, and it goes from a little vibration to a big problem real quick. And so by doing that, just that simple maintenance, it works the grease and adds a lot of life to these. There is a little wear puck right here. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, 3. And so you just want to make sure that the face of this cam, on this cover cam, that face is nice and clean. There's no damage to it. And that them pucks aren't wore to where that cast cam is going to ride on the cast of the other pulley. Very easy to see, very inexpensive, easy maintenance to do. And I think that's good enough for right there. Let's tip you up. So the unloading system, you can see how my chain has some sag. So this combine had 60 heavy chain on it. I'll get a new piece of chain because my tightener is run out of distance. And if this big of a chain, I would just replace it before I would take a link out. Instead of trying to be cheap, because a bad chain is what gives your sprockets premature wear. If you have an O-ring chain on your combine, Lexion used a lot of the other combines use an O-ring 80, a heavy chain here. Do not use standard chain lube on it. Go to an ATV shop and get O-ring chain lube if you want to use lube, or just leave it dry. Yeah, I think that covers that. Our feeder house chain, doesn't matter combine brand, you really want to take a close look at your feeder house chain. Check your slats for bent and broken, replace them. Never had good luck welding them if they were broke. Had okay luck straightening them if they needed to be straightened, if they didn't crack. The other thing we want to check is the floor. Make sure that we don't have holes in the floor. If you have an intermediate tray, make sure that they're good. Check your front drum. Just a simple glance, Is it fairly square to the front of the combine? If it's not, it's a quick way to see if these bearings have gone out on the sides there. Tension. So on the combines that have manual adjust, you know, set your tension to whatever your book says. On Lexion likes to run a little tighter, so the third flight in should still be off of the floor. If you have hydraulic adjust for maintaining tension, make sure that there's still room left on that operating cylinder, that it's not buried to the end. Lexion actually has a gauge for checking chains to see if they're out of spec. Pretty nice little tool. If they're out of spec and you have adjustment left, yeah, you usually get a couple more years. They're a good high quality chain. They really do a good job. And then we're going to run our reverser and make sure that our reverser works. We're also going to roll this chain around and look for our master links and make sure that the retaining clips are there on the master link. On the old John Deere's, they just had a little S. On the Lexion, they got a solid little pin that's cut on both ends. That seems to wear a lot better than them little S clips. But you want to check that retaining clip to make sure that it's not getting worn. Last thing you want is a chain to come apart on you. Top shaft, we're going to look at the top shaft. We're going to see what kind of wear on them sprockets. Are them sprockets starting to get cupped? Is everything still in line? Does it look like the bearings are still in good shape? That kind of stuff. All right, I am behind the camera. I did not become invisible. Don't be alarmed. So you can see there's the prep pan area right here. And you can see the light through because the corn just goes up them pans. And when it drops on the back side, other companies use them. The advantage is, compared to John Deere with its augers down here, with its shoe augers, is less grain damage. And you've already separated the grain and the mog, the chaff, material other than grain. So when it falls off the end, it's going to drop. As it drops, the air is going to hit it and blow the chaff out the back, and pretty clean grain is going to drop onto your shoe. So you notice with the Lexion, you run a lot different shoe settings than you would with the other brands. But so the prep pans, you just pull them out. Mine are the old steel ones, so we're making sure that there's no rusty holes, because below the prep pan is the ground. If you have a later model, I think 06 and later, you would have a plastic in here, and then each bay would pull out, make sure that a mouse hasn't chewed through them, or that a little fire on top of the transmission hasn't smoldered a hole in them, and pull them out, give them a good cleaning. Then I talked about that pre-thrash. Right there's your drum, your pre-thrash drum. And so you're going to check these caps, make sure they're not broken or missing or wore too far. They are reversible. This mount is replaceable. If you hit a rock, it will fold this down, and then you just cut your welds and re-weld the new one the same way that the factory one is on there. You do not want to burn it all the way around to make it super strong. By having these sides not welded, it's designed to collapse. And then we're going to feel up in here. There's a concave, just like a normal thrashing concave. So I run round bar up here. And you're going to make sure that there's no rock damage, that there's no excessive wear, stuff like that. And then you're good to go on this pre-thrash area. We're also going to make sure our dissoning plate lever works, because what that plate does is shuts that access off. So in corn, we open it so the easy to thrash corn will come off of this drum and drop right here and go into the clean grain system instead of through thrashing. If we have tough beans or small grains, we're going to shut this, and that's going to send everything through thrashing and separating. And if you have tough to thrash corn, high moisture corn, sometimes you'll shut them to get a little more corn on corn action in this concave area. But yeah, just a quick inspection down here. So here's our cylinder. It's kind of an important piece of the combine, your cylinder, your thrashing system. Doesn't matter if you have a cylinder or a rotor. You want to inspect the concave, make sure that everything looks good there. check your rub bars. Make sure your rub bars are still in good shape. They're not dented by rock. They're not worn down. And you want to make sure that your gauge in the cab is reading. So like on a Lexion, you'd throw a 7mm block in here and you'd close it all the way, and that's when it should touch the rub bar. If not, then you adjust that indicator with the little rod right there. Pretty easy to do. You also want to make sure that the concave is square to the cylinder. So the left, if you're 7mm on this side, you want to be 7mm on the other side, because it just does a better job. Things wear over time, believe it or not. Combines are a very high wear. In green stemmed beans like we have this year, guys are going to be running cylinders fast and aggressive, and that's a good way by sending slugs through, is to knock that concave out of adjustment. We do have accumulators on there to protect from slug damage, but things can still happen, things get worn. Kind of an important part just to have that double check to make sure that you're square and true. While we're right here, this is a great example of a tightener. So if we want to change this belt, Lexion did a great job here. What we would do is we'd tighten this nut, and you'd take this nut around to every tightener that looks like this. Excuse me. And if you tighten this nut up a little bit, it will collapse this tightener, and then you can pull the pin off of the belt tightener instead of running this nut all the way back up. Now, if you're on the other style, then where your bracket is here and the spring is pulling that way against the bracket, you'd tighten this nut down to collapse the tightener. But when you're operating, you'd have this nut, this is supposed to be the jam nut for here, you'd have that nut ran all the way to the yoke and snugged up against the yoke, because what can happen is as that tightener is vibrating, that nut can work down and it can just sit here and work against the tightener as it vibrates, and pretty soon it'll create a loose belt scenario. And so you don't want that. While we're on this side, your gearbox right there, change that oil annually. It's right here. Every 100 or 200 hours I'd change that oil. It does not hold very much oil, and you got all your engine power going through that gearbox. Change it on a regular basis. Use the cloth synthetic. On the pulley right there, see that webbing? That webbing is actually in the shape of fan blades to suck air in. You want to make sure you keep that clean. One, it will reduce vibrations. Two, by having that clean, it pulls air through and helps cool that gearbox. The other thing what we're going to do is on both sides is while the machine is running and you're walking around with your temp gun shooting bearings, what you're going to watch is the big belts. So if you've ever slipped a belt, it will actually burn a little hourglass shape in the belt. So the belt should run with a little wiggle, not bad. If it's terribly vibraty, a lot of vibration, replace it. That vibration is only going to hurt you in the long run. On your super big belts, like you got that tightener right there, that's a really long belt. If you watch that tightener, if it does this in a cadence, you know, every half second, every second, whatever it is, if it just does this or that, but always in a very rhythmic way, there's a flat spot on that belt. And if there's a flat spot on that main power transition belt, that will send a shock wave through the rest of the combine, and you can actually break the end of this shaft off on the other side. We'll go over there and look. Or you blow other belts because you have a moment in time of a potential slip going on, and so it sends that shock through. So just watch all your belts. That's what I'm saying. Rotor gearboxes. If you see one rotor tube, you can kind of see how the tube is poking out there. They're fairly equal. If you see one that's back about an inch than the other, then that one has bad bearings up front. And the big cause of bad bearings up front is guys neglect to grease them, Or they use a moly grease, which in the off season will harden in this grease line. So you put your electric on here and you pump, but you don't know that it's not actually pumping. So one, every morning, give these things 10 shots of grease. But two, if you're using an electric grease gun, pull the straw out the back and verify that the straw goes in with each pump, so you know for sure that you're getting grease. And your field service guys, they can climb in the grain tank, take a couple caps off, and they can verify, yep, we got clean grease coming. I had that. I went through 2 bearings on the right side and finally found out. Well, the first one was bad, and I got a grease zerk buster and I put on here and I got it free, and I used the synthetic grease, the cat blue grease. It's not true synthetic, but it's not moly. And but there still must have been some in here, because at some point it stopped taking grease and I didn't notice it, and that rotor bearing went out again. And so then the second time, before I put the new bearings in, back inside the machine, I pumped a lot of grease through them zerks to make sure I had good clean grease coming. All right, on your shoe, you want to just give it a good inspection. I washed in here, that's why it's all gunky. You want to just look at it, make sure you don't see any cracking in the framework around. Make sure that all the combs are nice and look nice. That hanger over there, there's one on each side. Make sure that the bushings are in good shape. There's a cord that runs off your actuator motor. It runs underneath and out that hole right there, out that hole on the other side. And I would probably have one of them on hand, because if you ever had either the chaffer or the sieve stop working on the automatic adjustment, that would be the first thing I would check, would be that simple little cord. Straw chopper, same on every combine. You want to just come in here and take a look at the knives. Are any of them damaged or missing? Are the bushings fairly snug in them? You know, there's not a whole lot of clunk, clunk, clunk back and forth while the combine's running. You're going to come back here, ouch, and hit your head. And you're just going to pay attention to how bad it's vibrating. Here's our rotor variators. Same maintenance as the other one. Give them good greasing, and then cycle them fast, slow. You're watching the belt for vibration. That big long belt right there, you're watching for vibration. There is a couple hidden zerks right up in there. There's a little grease bank right there. Don't forget to grease that. Your pendulum. So that's your equalizer for the shoe. It would be the equivalent of a self-leveling sieve for the competition, except you're not self-leveling anything. What it does is there's a little pendulum inside, and it moves this hydraulic cylinder. And as that hydraulic cylinder moves, it changes the lever action right here. So on flat ground, your chaffer and sieve do this, forward and back. If we start leaning to our left, this will swing, and then your chaffer and sieve will actually toss uphill. And it works phenomenal. Super simple. Works absolutely phenomenal. The Lexion can go at quite the heck of a slope without needing a side hill kit, because of that compensating kit. So to test yours out would be to park on a side, get driving, start the separator, and run on a side hill, and then make sure that this is still hanging level. Pretty simple. Clean grain elevator. If you have ag leader, you tighten it at the bottom. You should have a sticker, because you do not want to adjust it at the top with any brand, because you have an impact plate up there that you've calibrated at the clearance that you have. If you tighten the elevator up there, you change that clearance, and if you do that, you just have to go through recalibration again, or calibrate quite often in the beginning. So pay attention to that. If you don't have the ag leader kit, the ag leader moisture monitor and impact plate, if you've tied into factory stuff, if you've got the hydraulic tensioning system here, just make sure, remember to open the valve once or twice during the season while your separator's running. If you have the Lexion moisture meter set up here, there's a cylinder up here that cycles a gate. Don't be scared to feel to make sure that the gate is still there. They don't tend to. It's not a chronic problem, but every once in a while you hear of one of them breaking off, and then your moisture meter doesn't. You stop reading moisture, and if you stop reading moisture, it's a great indicator something's wrong with your auger or that flapper door. If you have the factory setting, otherwise it's an elevator. Check the bottom and top gears for cupping. Tailing's pretty simple. It tightens up top like everybody else. Check the bottom down here for cupping on the sprockets. And the paddles, you know, both of them, you're checking the paddles for wear or damage. I got a frog in my throat. We have our 2-speed gearbox, and through this hole, there's our bolt right there. So you take that bolt out, and there's one on the opposite side, and that you take it out. So right now we're in low range because that inner gear hub is to the chassis. To go into high range, you take that out, and then you'd go through this hole here into a hole in the gearbox. Well, that little bolt has a simple little bushing on it. If that bushing is bad, if you got some slop in that hole, replace that bushing. Otherwise, that pulley sits there and vibrates while it runs, and it will hammer out them holes, and we don't want that. Our engine bay, there's a couple things here. One, this aspirator tube, we want that 100% functioning. It's got to be functioning, because without it, you can fill these air filters up very fast. The other thing, while we're up here on our rotary screen, we want to check this horsehair, make sure that it's got a good, that it looks good, that there's not a big missing gap. You can have little tiny missing pieces, but you don't want a missing chunk. Our seal, can I do this one-handed? I can. Make sure our coolers and everything are clean, and our coolers are clean. And I notice I got a gap in my seal right here, so I'll have to either see if I can't find a chunk of this, or take silicone or some foam, some stickum foam, and fill that in, because we don't want an air gap coming around. With our feeder house down, you check your hydrostatic oil or your hydraulic oil. You want to give your engine bay just a quick glance. Are all your air tubes snug? You don't see a funny pattern. If you see a funny pattern around one of them, that's usually a leak, but just make sure, put a wrench on them, make sure that they're tight. Check any boots for cracking on the intake side. Water hoses, does anything look like it's getting old and worn? The belt, does that look good? You know, just good basic, put an eye on stuff, touch things. Do they seem right to you? All right, guys, so hopefully you can save yourself some downtime just by spending some time on your combine, and just double checking some stuff before you go to the field, and with just a couple common basic maintenance things daily on the rotors and cycling the variators, you can save yourself a lot of time and trouble. If you do have a variator go to hell, let me know, because there's a machine shop that can fix them. So instead of $4,500 for a variator, it's $700 some bucks or whatever it is to have it fixed and brought back to new, so you still use OEM bushings. So that's a pretty good racket that they got going there, and it helps a lot. There's already been several guys who I've sent there, and it's worked out very well. But for the most part, they're a heavy built combine. When we start getting into beans, we'll go through the crop flow of the combine and how does a Lexion combine actually work, and we'll go from there. But so hey, give your combine a look over, do some regular maintenance and preventative maintenance, and see how much better your harvest goes versus just pulling it out of the shed. It starts good enough. There's too much of that out there, and so guys, Good luck, be safe.